Episode 26B, Do We Have a Choice? This is the second part of the Laotian refugee story. The nearby vacant apartment that Bouillon thought might work for his brother was uninhabitable, as I knew from a previous refugee housing search. The owner had told me that the third-floor apartment had been gutted and then abandoned. I had not as yet shared this information with Bouillon. At that time, the vacancy rate in town was 0. Plus, in Southbridge, as elsewhere, landlords do not welcome families with large numbers of children. I knew this firsthand from charitable and personal experience. Finding a large, low-cost apartment was a real experience. To find large, low-cost apartments, newspaper and real estate brokers' listings are practically useless. More direct, almost military methods are necessary, such as a street-by-street search. In Southbridge, the main type of housing for low-income people is the three-decker, which is a turn-of-the-century New England peculiarity. I myself grew up in one in Boston. Many generations of various ethnic arrivals have been brought up in such housing and then moved on to prosperity and suburban home ownership, including me. The three-decker is a wooden fire trap consisting of 3 single-floor apartments, one on top of the other, box-like. Each has its own rear porch, usually festooned with clotheslines. Open stairways connect the porches, which of necessity become communal spaces with cluttered storage of odd-valued items. Tenants supply their own heat from cook stove/heater combinations, oil or gas space heaters or wood stove or portable electric heaters. Combining all these heat sources with usually ancient electric wiring tends to set the occupants on fire occasionally. Jean and I, with the help of church volunteers, ecumenically and mostly Catholic, experienced from previous housing searches, organized a hunt for an inexpensive three-decker apartment. The idea is to drive around town looking for apartments without curtains or window shades, a usual sign of vacancy. This method can have some embarrassing results, however. At one house, with bare windows on the 3rd floor, Jean pushed open what looked like the communal entry door at ground level. When she went inside, she was mortified to find herself in someone's home. Worse, she was in someone's bedroom. Worse yet, a couple occupied the bed. Jean made a hasty retreat, but not before doggedly asking the occupants now awake if they knew of a vacancy in the building. She had no success there either. Weeks went by without success. The plea for help for donations for the refugee family that was preached from the local pulpits and broadcast and published by local media was so successful it was making conditions worse at Bouillon's 4-room apartment. The donations of warm clothing, toys, bedding, furniture, and appliances were piled up everywhere. It made the 16 inhabitants pine for an empty corner in the apartment. 16 people in a 4-room apartment can be wearing on each other's nerves. I assumed an appointment was needed to use the bathroom. Sleeping arrangements were in shifts. Both Liep and Bouillon and their family, however, maintained their good humor and common Laotian politeness in spite of the strain. To the landlord's and the neighbors' complaint about the inevitable noise and unhealthful, crowded conditions, they bowed and smiled and smiled and bowed. How long could this go on? I began to have doubts myself. What good were my efforts and good intention when 16 people were living hardly better than they had at the Thai refugee camp? The only bright spot was that the children were learning English through the efforts of a 60-year-old gray-haired dynamo from the literacy volunteers, Yvette Lamoureux. Tiny, bespectacled, and intense, Yvette saw the Laotian as just the latest in a long line of immigrants to settle in Southbridge, beginning with the Irish, then her own French-Canadian ancestors, and continuing with Italians, Poles, Greeks, Puerto Ricans, Romanians, Albanians, Portuguese, and East Indians. Learning English, she knew, was the key to success. The children's responding to signs and grunts revealed that she had established communication, which would lead to literacy and then to school. We had decided that the housing situation had become desperate. Jean and I took another look at the third floor of the gutted and abandoned apartment which Bourleon had first suggested. Could it be as bad as the owner had said? Yes, even worse. The owner had started to renovate it some years before. He had torn out the old plaster walls and ceilings, along with the heating, plumbing, and wiring. Then he discovered the cost to finish the job, and he dropped it. Vandals had then taken over and trashed the place. By smashing windows and doors, they had provided the only amenity, cross-ventilation, which partially relieved the foul odor. "You're a salesman," said Jean as we examined the damaged apartment. "Do you think you could convince the owner to fix the place up?" "He's already turned down 4 or 5 such requests. He doesn't want to work on the place anymore," I replied. Then Jean posed the innocent but faithful question. "Do you think we could do the work ourselves?" I looked at her and then looked around the place. I looked at the back porch with its loose railings and dangerous rickety stairs made impassable by broken glass, newspapers, dirt, and piled up junk. Then I went into the bathroom, dark with its missing window, the disconnected, seatless toilet which seemed to be laughing uproariously at me. I looked at the bare wood lathing, stripping the walls and ceiling. As I was dropping into a classic black Irish mood, Jean said, "We could get the resettlement volunteers to help, and I know the other Laotians would pitch in." I looked at her again with resignation. She looked back and said, "Do we have a choice?" The next day, with my salesman's spirit somehow miraculously regenerated, I called the Catholic Refugee Resettlement Agency to ask if the temporary funds allotted for Leop's rent could be advanced to buy construction materials to go with volunteer labor. After explaining there was no other housing solution, they agreed. I then called the owner. "Would you allow volunteers to turn your abandoned property into a valuable income-producing apartment complete with a tenant? Would you exchange monthly rent for the value of the materials supplied?" I asked. He began to make objections, but I shamelessly pointed out that it is not often that God gives one the opportunity to be a good Christian and to make a profit at the same time. "Well, when you put it like that," he replied, "I really don't have a choice, do I?" Not only did he accept my offer, he and his wife generously agreed to help with the work. The work. If I had known how big this job really was, if I had known the skills and experience required, if I had known the cajoling, diplomacy, and people skills necessary to coordinate the volunteers, if I had known, but fortunately I did not know. The renovation was both tragic and comic. For instance, Leop, trying to be helpful, came in alone one day and tried to repair the floor by painting it. The dirt, cracks, splinters, holes, and bits of old linoleum did not vanish with a coat of paint as he expected. When the night volunteers arrived after working all day at their own job, they were furious to find a muddy mixture of dirt, splinters, and wet paint in the very room where they intended to install ceiling tiles. Other disputes popped up, like the day crew of women who scrubbed the kitchen floor spotlessly clean and found the next day the night crew putting up sheetrock walls had spilled paste and water and dirt all over their clean work. I tried to keep peace at such times, but usually both sides blamed me. We spoke English, French, and Laotian on the job. We had our own 3-decker towerette of Babel. The contractor's 72-year-old plumber spoke only French. Yvette Lemereau translated my orders to him. The owner spoke French, and he also gave sometimes conflicting orders to the same plumber. Also, one of the Laotian volunteers spoke a pidgin French and gave other orders to the plumber. Leop tried to tell the plumber what to do with hand signals. The poor man did not know what to do. Should he listen to the building's owner or the man who was paying the bills, me, who was not always there, or should he do what he thought best? Finally, he did what the last man who spoke to him wanted. 2 weeks later, and too much money later, he left in disgust. Hot water came out of the cold water pipes. The real hot water pipes were plugged, and a new toilet lay on the side on the bedroom floor. This one laughing at me too. I tried to install the new pipes and fixtures myself, but plumbing is not my strong suit. Liam tried to help me, but his previous life included no contact with plumbing, indoor or out. Some progress, however, was made. We sent the windows out to be reglazed. We installed some electrical rewiring. We put up some walls and ceiling. Weeks and weeks of work still had brought Liam no closer to moving in. The owner's wife began to worry about the poor quality of the work. She was right. One tape and spackle job looked less like a ceiling and more like a 3D contour map. I began to worry that I had taken on a job that was beyond me. I was spending money that was not mine with little to show for it. The volunteers would soon run out of gas. Liam began to worry that the apartment would never be livable, but he did not tell me because he did not want to hurt my feelings. Privately, he approached Yvette and asked her to find him another place to live. That dear old lady spared my feelings too. Nevertheless, she declared martial law. She called all the volunteers together to compile a list of all the things we could put off and those that absolutely had to be done before Liam could move in. Anything we could postpone, we did. The important thing, she said, was to set an early and firm date for moving in and stick to it. So she went home and got on the phone. She cajoled relatives, entreated friends, badgered town and utility officials, implored strangers, and shamed tradesmen. Within 3 days, a new plumber had the piping sinks, the toilet, and tub installed and working. The cooking and heating stoves were connected. A carpenter had hung the doors to the bedroom, bathroom, and most importantly, a front door with a lock. I was ready to call the utility companies to get electricity, gas, and water turned on when a final disaster struck. The owner's wife confiscated the door keys in an encounter that had all the friendliness of a race riot. She had had several skirmishes with us before, but her dissatisfaction with the quality of our work had finally reached the boiling point. No one, she said, will be allowed to move into this place until the wallpaper is hung in each room and hung properly. I intend to do the work myself. I don't want anybody or anything in my way. Wallpapering was one of the postponed jobs. Gloom and despair settled over Liam and his family and all the volunteers. It might be weeks before she completed the wallpapering. She was thorough but ploddingly slow. In the meantime, Liam and their families would have to continue to suffer intolerable cramped quarters with no certain date of release. Once again, Yvette came to the rescue. On the 4th day of her persnickety wallpapering, the owner's wife was invited to visit the Bonleon apartment. Her quick tour of the unhealthy premises prompted a pinched conscience and a return of the apartment keys. Liam and his family moved in the same day. Hosanna! All that was over a year ago as I write this. I have just returned from Liam's apartment. His 14 months of agency advance free rent based on the rehabilitation of the apartment is about to run out. He is working at the same factory as his brother and asking me about buying a used truck. In the kitchen, Van is busy performing oriental magic, creating mouth-watering aromas of Laotian cooking. In the living room, now wallpapered, Van's mother and the 6 children, most now in school, were using a wall-mounted blackboard and memorizing English verb conjugations. I have issued strict orders to the resettlement agency never to call me again. This is Rod Murphy. Thank you for viewing or listening to my podcast episodes. I really appreciate it. If you liked it, and if you so choose, I ask you to send a good review and refer a friend who might be interested in this old Boston podcast series. Again, my thanks.